Hello everyone, today's topic is Breonna Taylor. The case, the facts, and of course the good old reaction from the left and the right. So, let's look at the facts of this case. If you ask your average misinformed MSNBC watching person, the first thing they will tell you is that she was innocent. That she shouldn't have happened, shouldn't have been there, all this. They'll tell you that she was sleeping in her bed, dreaming about puppies and rainbows, doing absolutely nothing wrong. And then police came up into her apartment, looked at her, down in her bed, realized she was a black woman, and just started blasting. Well, unfortunately, this is not true. Unfortunately. So, the actual facts of this case are actually pretty simple. There was a warrant for Breonna Taylor's boyfriend and herself. Her name was on the warrant. Her house was on the warrant because there was alleged drug activity and any kind of drug trafficking, money counting, distribution, all that was happening within her house. So they had a warrant. And they showed up, they knocked on the door, they inscribed themselves as police officers, and Breonna Taylor's boyfriend started shooting out the door. Now, if anyone has seen Cops or a movie or just has any general sense, if you shoot at cops, they will shoot back. It's their job to do that. Especially when they were there constitutionally on a warrant and were there to arrest those people for committing crimes or allegedly committing crimes. But because they started shooting at them, the police have now realized that these people have basically forfeited their right to a trial and to everything else that is under our Constitution. So they began shooting back. Now, of the three officers involved, the one that was shooting blindly into the apartment building and was shooting the other apartment's walls, he was indicted. And because he was indicted, because of reckless endangerment. And that is very reasonable because you can't just be shooting blindly into someone else's house when it's not in question. Now, for the officers that shot Breonna Taylor, this was obviously accidental. They didn't even know where they were shooting into. They were shooting into this apartment that could have had 16 guns, one gun, it doesn't matter. It was shooting from this apartment. They returned fire, and she was caught in the crossfire. And I think that's awful. It really is. It's terrible that this had to happen in the way that it did. But to say that the cops are completely at fault and that they should be indicted for manslaughter is pretty ridiculous. I mean, when you look at who is truly at fault here, it's the boyfriend. It is. He was the one peddling drugs, he was the one shooting at police officers, and he got his own girlfriend caught in crossfire, and it is completely his fault. Now, the misinformation on this entire case is ridiculous. Because when I see people talking about this case on social media, in the news, out in the streets protesting, they refuse to acknowledge the other facts of the case. Or they may not even know the other facts of the case. And it goes to show why people go freaking nuts every time someone is shot by police. Every single time it seems like these days. The guy in Rochester had a knife and was literally sprinting at the cops with a knife. And people rioted and protested in the streets because of this knife-wielding maniac? When the hell did we in America start to praise black criminals, or any criminals? I saw a video of people chanting in the street, almost 100 people chanting, "Save black criminals," or "Justice for black criminals." Like, first off, who cares if they're black? Who really cares? If they're a criminal, they're a criminal. If you break the law, you break the law. The law doesn't see colors. The law on paper does not see color. It just doesn't. If you break the law, you break the law. People say, "Oh well, black people get longer charges for the same crimes that white people do." Like, well, men receive longer sentences for the crimes committed and the same crimes that are committed by women. You gotta ask, why did they receive a longer sentence? It's probably because they have a longer record. People with more of a record who commit more crimes serve longer sentences for the same crime. It's all dependent on the judge, it's dependent on the prosecutor, and dependent on the defense lawyer that they may have. There's all kinds of things that attribute to it. But to say that racism, an institutional racism, a completely made up fact by Ibrahim X. Kennedy way back, and they decide that, oh, it's immediately racism. Every single case, it's all racism, and that's why we have problems in this country, is because of racism. But it's not true. You have to look at the facts. You have to look at what actually transpired during these events. And people have to sit back and just relax for just a second before start chanting racism, before you take to the streets and start setting fucking targets on fire, 7-Elevens. Instead, relax. Wait for the body cam footage to come out. Wait for the facts to be released. And then let justice take its place. It's not that difficult. That is what we've always done. Even back in the 1700s, after the Boston Massacre, where British troops opened fire on a crowd of essentially protesters, and this is an awful scenario. Crispus Attucks, a black man who was the first man shot, along with 5 other people who were shot and killed in this Boston Massacre, people were pissed. And these were British troops. These weren't even, elected or appointed police officers within the colonies. These were British troops illegally quartering in Boston. And yet, John Adams, the second president of our United States, came to the defense of those British troops and said, essentially, in court, that these people were innocent because they had rocks thrown on them, ice, clamshells, things like that. And from what they had determined within that court is that someone else, not the officer in charge of those troops, said fire. And because they said fire, they fired. And those people were shot, and it was awful, and it was a tragedy. But justice said that those troops were innocent, and they should not have been charged with manslaughter. It's the same case now. It is the exact same case with Breonna Taylor. You have a man inside the apartment shooting out of the apartment at police officers. A police officer was shot in the leg. They were there on a warrant, lawfully, and unfortunately, Breonna Taylor gets shot. It's terrible, but to say that racism is to blame, institutional racism, but police are racist and they're to blame and they need to be indicted on manslaughter charges just for doing their job, it's not right. Look at history, look at justice, and for God's sake, relax until we know the facts. Never stop learning.